Alzheimer's disease is one of the most important public health challenges of our time, with millions of Americans currently living with Alzheimer's. And that number is expected to grow substantially in the decades ahead. Our understanding of Alzheimer's is also rapidly evolving, knowing now that changes in the brain may begin years before symptoms appear, which creates opportunities for earlier detection, risk reduction, and intervention. This is Aging Forward, a podcast from Mayo Clinic about the science behind healthy aging and longevity. Each episode, we explore new ways to take care of our long-term health, the health of our loved ones, and our community, so we can all live longer and better. I'm Dr. Christina Chen, a geriatrician and internist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And today we are honored to welcome Dr. Heather Snyder. She's the Senior Vice President of Medical and Scientific Relations at the Alzheimer's Association, where she leads major research initiatives advancing prevention, diagnostics, and innovative therapies worldwide. She joins us to discuss where the science is headed and how we can all age forward with better brain health and with greater hope. Welcome, Dr. Snyder. Lovely to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
To start, let's just talk about the disease. Can you help clarify to our listeners what is Alzheimer's disease and how does that fit into the broader category of dementia?
A good way to think about it is dementia is that umbrella. It's the symptoms a person is experiencing. It's the changes of memory, thinking, reasoning that are impacting an individual's daily life and ultimately their dependence. Alzheimer's disease is specific brain changes, and it is the most common form of dementia. Our brains are this complex organ that are made up of so many pieces and parts. There are over 100 billion nerve cells, and these brain cells have very specialized jobs that allow our brains to really function as this control center. When we think about Alzheimer's disease, we see changes in the brain that begin long before we see the clinical symptoms, the changes in memory, thinking, and reasoning. And if you look at the brain tissues of individuals with Alzheimer's, you see these clumps of proteins between the brain cells. They're called plaques. And the primary component of those plaques is known as beta amyloid or amyloid beta. Then if you look inside the brain cells, you see a clump of proteins and they're called tangles or neurofibrillary tangles. I mean, it looks like a giant hair tangle. I mean, that's how I think of it. And the primary component is known as tau. Those are two of the hallmark brain changes that we talk about. They are only the tip of the iceberg. There's so many changes with the immune system that are happening. There's changes with the way blood flows in and around the brain and is bringing nutrients in, how our brain cells are then processing those nutrients for their food and energy sources as well. And how all of that is intersecting is what ultimately results in Alzheimer's dementia or mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. You see a loss of brain cells, and then you see the clinical symptoms that emerge that an individual experiences.
How prevalent is that today? We know there's millions, but how many million? And how is that expected to change in the upcoming decades?
We've continued to see the numbers of individuals that are living with Alzheimer's dementia increase. Part of that is because our population is aging. And in this year's Alzheimer's Association Facts and Figures report, we share that there's around 7.4 million Americans that are living with Alzheimer's dementia that's clinically diagnosed. And that's really important because we've made so many advances in the science that we can better understand what really is causing somebody's memory changes. So for the first time this year, we also included numbers of individuals that are living with mild cognitive impairment, the earlier memory changes that is due to Alzheimer's disease specifically.
We're talking about 7.4 million, but it's probably a lot more than that in terms of who it affects, the people around them and the society and communities around them.
We talk about the emotional and the societal toll, but cost to the family as well, right? The total lifetime cost for the care of somebody living with dementia is estimated at more than $400,000. And a lot of that falls on the family. So that impact is not just on the person, but really the entire unit.
And in the next 10, 20 years, how much are we anticipating that to increase, you think?
Well, I think with the aging population, we do anticipate the numbers will continue to increase.
Yeah.
But I balance that with also the advances that we're making in science. So we currently have 2 FDA-approved medications that are targeting underlying biology. And the science is telling us that they're the most beneficial, or they have the better outcomes for individuals in an earlier stage.
Alzheimer's prevention is a little bit different because we have to start much earlier than anticipated. Can you talk about prevention, what that means from preventing the disease from happening in the first place, but also slowing the progression?
I love your clarification of the two, right? There's both preventing the disease. Can we do that?
Yeah.
And then there's also preventing that progression. So you can have the biology, but can you prevent the clinical symptoms? Can you stop that progression to having the cognitive impairment, the changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning? And there's a lot of work going on in both areas. Some of the research right now is heavily focused on preventing the cognitive impairment. Individuals may have some of that biology in their brain, but can we stop it so that we don't necessarily see it translate into those clinical symptoms? But there is some work that's also going on at how do we even get ahead of that biology, and what does that look like at an earlier and earlier timeline? When we think about just that general concept of brain health, so really how we think, we learn, and we remember, there's this window of time that's midlife and maybe even earlier life. That's when we start worrying about our blood pressure, our cholesterol, our sleep, our stress levels. And all of that ties into our brain health. And really, how do we keep our brain as strong as we can as we age? And if our brain is resilient, is it able to stand that better or longer? And what does that look like?
Really looking at it from a perspective of how do we keep our brains as happy and as engaged as possible, because unhappy, diseased, sleep-deprived brain that's not socially connected is not going to be very functional later on, right? So let's dive a little bit deeper into specific risk factors. So non-modifiable stuff first. What are some risks that happen naturally with time that we don't have as much control over?
One of the greatest risk factors for cognitive impairment and dementia are genetics. So if you had a parent or a sibling that had a memory concerns, including Alzheimer's disease, you're at an increased risk. Now, there are many people that have a family history that do not develop those memory changes. And there are many people that have a family history and do not develop disease. There have probably been about over 100 different variations of genes that have been associated with either increasing and actually a few that have been shown with decreased risk. And it's how they may come together. And it's really that makeup that may contribute to a person's overall risk. But for the majority of us, they do not determine our fate.
Right.
It's this mix of these non-modifiable factors, like our genetics. Age is certainly one of them, along with those that are in our environment that might be modifiable, or there may be something that we could, as a society, do something about.
Let's talk about what can we do? What are the most important modifiable risk factors that people can address today?
In our annual report, or our facts and figures, there was a survey that asked Americans around brain health. And 90% say brain health is important as I age, but less than 10% say they know what to do about it. The good news is there's lots of things that we can potentially do. So quitting smoking, there's been studies to tell us that individuals that even reduce the amount they smoke, that there's a benefit to that. Individuals that have smoked for many years and quit, there's a benefit to that in terms of their brain health. Your heart health and your metabolic health, manage that. Have that conversation with your doctor. Know your numbers, know your blood pressure, know your cholesterol, and talk to your doctor about how to manage that in your life. That may be with behavioral interventions, that may be with medication, but manage those numbers. The science tells us that if we're able to manage those numbers in midlife and as we age, that also has a greater benefit in our brain health. Getting more exercise, things that get our blood pumping,
Right.
get our blood going into our brains, and that movement. Eating a balanced, nutritious diet. I get asked all the time, what supplement should I take? Or this supplement over that supplement? And the answer, unfortunately, is there's no one supplement. It's making sure your brain has its nutrients. There have been numerous studies that have looked at different diets: the DASH diet, the MIND diet, the Mediterranean diet, the Nordic diet. The common things in those diets are low sugars, low saturated fats, more vegetables, and really thinking about that and how to incorporate that into your life. Where are those changes that you can take what you're doing and make these small adjustments? And maybe you eat ice cream every night, and that's where you're starting. So can you now go to every other night? And then maybe you go to just 2 nights a week. And those small adjustments over time will get you to where you need to go.
I love that. And I love that you started with the risks related to vascular health, because our blood vessels are so important. And if those habits are impacting your heart health, there is a pretty high risk that it's also impacting your brain health. Right? The same vessels supply the brain. And over the years, we've also learned that there's a lot more things that impact our brain health in terms of sensory input, our vision, our hearing. Our brain needs rest and recuperation, right, through our sleep. Also mental health. Can you talk about how these influence Alzheimer's risk as well?
The two of those that you mentioned that I feel like I'm getting asked about all the time is the science around hearing loss and the science around sleep. And the data is strong. So sleep. There was one study that looked at that magic number, if you will, of 7 hours plus or minus 2 hours of really quality sleep as being the most beneficial. And they followed thousands of individuals over 20 years. And that 7 hours of quality sleep seemed to be the magic number for brain health, for reducing cognitive decline in the population. The science behind it is that when we sleep, there's underlying biological changes that our brain goes through, and it really helps to revive and refresh our brain for the next day or our overall cognitive engagement. It's more complicated than that, but that is essentially what happens. And if we don't sleep or we don't have our optimal sleep, then our brain isn't necessarily at its best the next day when it's then trying to function and do everything that we're asking it to do. And so making sure that we manage sleep, if you have sleep disturbances or sleep apnea, addressing those with your healthcare provider is a path that we've seen to have some benefit. In fact, there have been a couple small studies for individuals with sleep apnea that have told us that when they've intervened with a CPAP, that there's actually a benefit, that they see almost a reversal of that risk. And then hearing loss, that's such a big one that plays a role in so many aspects of life. So your cognition, but also your social engagement. If you're experiencing hearing loss and you're in a social environment, you may not contribute as much or engage as much in the conversation because it's just more challenging. There have been a lot of studies to show this association between hearing loss and cognitive decline in later life. It's a little unclear if it's just because of the overall changes in the brain, or if there's a more of a cause and effect association that the hearing loss is causing or contributing to other changes in the brain.
I see.
There was a really large study that came out of Johns Hopkins where they actually enrolled, I think it was over 6,000 individuals, and they used a hearing intervention in those individuals. They did not see that hearing aid in of itself was able to change risk for the individuals. But what was really interesting is that when they looked at the data, they had a large population of people that had vascular risk factors. And in those individuals, the intervention was beneficial.
I see.
So it's the synergy, right? It's not the one or the other.
Yeah. I do have a very interesting story regarding the hearing loss. My father lives with us. He's 88 years old. And for the past 5 years, he just refused to get his current hearing aids updated. And we can tell that he just could not hear because he was getting more withdrawn, wasn't participating in conversation, just more quiet. And finally, we're like, you know what, Dad, we got to get your hearing aids renewed. We're like, I know it's expensive, but it's worth the investment because this is your brain health. We got him a new hearing aids, and all of a sudden, he's like a whole new person. He's all of a sudden just so much more vibrant and happy. He's laughing more. And I'm like, we went through years of just, I felt bad, like we neglected to get this done for you. But even he noticed it. He's like, I didn't realize how much hearing loss was impacting my, not just mental health, but his social connection, his ability to just relate with people and participate in family conversations. It's a really big deal. And so that's such a impactful thing to get addressed if that is affecting your life.
I mean, you've nailed it, right? So hearing loss is one. If you've got sleep disturbances, there's another. Making some of those small changes in your diet. If you're smoking, maybe slow down or quit. Those are things that we can all take action today that are going to benefit our brain health. And it's never too late and it's never too early to do them.
Absolutely. Any other impactful lifestyle changes you would say would be really important to address as early as possible?
The Alzheimer's Association has the 10 ways to love your brain, which really outline these research-informed 10 things that we can do. Probably some of the strongest data is consistently around being physically active and getting moving in every way that we can. Find things you're going to enjoy doing and keep doing them. I am never going to run a marathon. Every year I think, this will be the year. I'm going to do it.
I'm in the same boat. Don't worry about it.
Never never happening. But I love walking. I love riding my bike. And so how can I make sure I'm bringing those things into my life and doing them in a way that's getting my blood pumping and my heart racing? And so I think it's finding those things that you're going to do and you're going to stick to. I was talking to someone recently and they were telling me they were having knee problems. And so they used to be a runner and now they just didn't know what to do. And someone had told them to start swimming and they fell in love. So this became really their thing, that they were going to make sure that they engage in physical activity for their brain.
Let's talk about early detection here and making the diagnosis early, because I think the sooner we find out about something, the more opportunities we have to take action, right? And so we're understanding now that Alzheimer's pathology may begin years, perhaps decades before symptoms happen. And so that really needs to kind of shift the way that we think about when do we make that diagnosis, how do we screen, and how do we implement early prevention strategies. And personally, I have started to change the way that I talk to my patients in their 30s and perhaps late 40s, looking for clues, like you mentioned, lack of sleep and exercise and early signs of metabolic disease or mental health concerns, that we should really be doing this much earlier than by the time someone comes to the office and there's already a cognitive deficit. Can you talk about how we should be changing our way about thinking of diagnosis and prevention?
First, I love that you're bringing that into the conversation at all ages. Brain health isn't something that we wake up at a certain age and now it becomes important. It's really a lifelong pursuit. And we are seeing these advances in tools that will allow us to better understand when someone's having a memory complaint, what might be the reason for that memory complaint, and trying to do it at an earlier time point. And I alluded to this. The data are telling us that the 2 FDA-approved medications that target underlying biology, the earlier in the progression of the disease, so people with those early memory changes, they seem to have better outcomes if they make that choice to use the medication. So it underscores just really the importance of early detection and diagnosis, and for individuals that may be a path of care, that they can make that decision, they can have that conversation and do so at a time that they may have a greater benefit. But there's been so much work, so much amazing work in tools that are coming along, these what we call biomarkers that allow us to measure the underlying biology. Today, in fact, there are 2 FDA-cleared blood tests for Alzheimer's disease, and they're different. One is testing that tau protein, but it's a very specific form of tau called p-tau217 that seems to be also a good marker of the level of beta amyloid that is built up in an individual's brain. And that's been cleared by the FDA in specialty care for people that have memory complaints and memory concerns as part of the diagnostic workup to confirm Alzheimer's disease. And that is a pretty significant advance to have a tool like this that was more readily available. The other tools we've had were like PET imaging or cerebral spinal fluid, lumbar puncture, not as readily accessible to everybody.
Right.
The other FDA cleared test is another form of tau called p-tau181, and that has been approved as a rule-out diagnosis. So for people that are having memory concerns at their primary care doctor, to try to say, what could this be? And do you need further evaluation? Or how can we determine what your path should be for your care?
Yeah.
If it's positive, you need further evaluation and to go forward with that. If it's negative, then your memory complaints are likely not due to Alzheimer's disease and there's something else going on. And that really helps in that overall diagnostic workup and helping get people to the care that they need as quickly as they can.
Can you talk about the value of genetic testing at this time and the risk profiling that's being used? What are the implications for patients in that regard?
There have been over 100 different variations of genes that have been associated with both increased and decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And probably the most well-studied of these is known as apolipoprotein EE4 or ApoE4. And that shows that when an individual has one copy, they're at a slightly increased risk. And if they have two copies, they're at an even greater risk of developing the disease. And for many years, it was if you had a first-degree relative, there was not more that this information could tell you. Increasingly, with the new treatments that have come on board for individuals, this is considered part of that decision-making for individuals in terms of treatment. But some people just want to know. I met one person and they had told me, I just want to know. I just want this information. It's going to change for me what I'm going to do.
Yes.
Others have said, I don't want to know. But if you have that information, it is important to understand where you are protected and where you're not protected. There's something called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, and individuals that have this information, they're protected from employment and health insurance. They're not protected in terms of long-term care and life insurance. So just understand what those risks could be.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest question that people have is, if they screen early, say in their 40s, and p-tau is positive, their genetic testing is positive, their risk profile is high, does implementing all the preventive strategies early, and will that change their outcome? Like, if I do everything right and reduce all my risks, will I somehow escape developing Alzheimer's?
That's a great question. It's a hugely important question, and we don't know the answer. I will say we also don't completely understand all the risks for somebody that doesn't have symptoms long-term. And in fact, the Alzheimer's Association is working with a group of ethical and legal experts to try to understand what those considerations should be.
Let's talk a little bit about the other part of prevention arm, which is when we have the early changes, is there a way to slow down progression and prevent disease from getting worse? What strategies are available to slow disease progression if we already have a diagnosis or perhaps early changes of mild cognitive impairment, like you mentioned earlier?
Today, there are 2 FDA-approved medications. They target the underlying biology, specifically beta amyloid, although it's important to know that they're not exactly the same in how they target beta amyloid. They are different, and they lower the levels of beta amyloid, and then the studies have shown a clinical benefit on individuals, so a slowing of that decline, if you will, and particularly those with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's or mild dementia, so in the earlier stages of those memory changes. They're not perfect. There are some considerations that go into care and is a conversation that should have with their doctor. But just add into that, these are our firsts. And we have just seen so much momentum in terms of really the diversity of what's moving into the clinical pipeline, the idea of combination approaches. And I think we're going to continue to see the robustness of options that are available for people throughout the entire disease progression continue to evolve.
That's really exciting to know that this is just the beginning, and there's more to come. Can you share how effective are these treatments so far based on the research that you're seeing, and what should patients understand about the risks and benefits?
The real-world data that we're seeing suggests that these medications, they're called monoclonal antibodies that target beta amyloid. Those risks can be managed in the clinic, again, with the appropriate use guidelines. The main side effect that I think is something called amyloid-related imaging abnormality, small changes in the brain that are maybe small bleeds in the brain. In many cases, if individuals are removed from treatment, those are able to be managed, but there have been some significant side effects for some individuals as well, and so they need to be managed accordingly.
And then beyond amyloid, we also had alluded to this earlier, the growing interest in tau-targeted therapies and even vaccines. What are your thoughts on these emerging approaches?
We have just seen almost an explosion of areas of science in the last decade, understanding the immune system, changes in the immune system that may be targets for potential therapies. The tau protein that you mentioned, we've seen just an incredibly robust number of potential drugs or potential targets related to tau move into clinical trials. There is an ongoing gene therapy trial that's actually testing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which is like happy juice for our brain cells. Right? Can we put that in the place that is so often impacted early in Alzheimer's? And can we boost the brain cells' health in that area of the brain and see a benefit in those individuals? And those are just some of the avenues that are being explored. One of the parts that I'm actually also really excited to see is combinations. Think about other complex diseases. It's not a one or all. We actually think about here's your biology. Here's what's changed in you at this time in the disease progression. And here's how I'm going to treat it because you've got this immune change and this vascular change. And that's actually what I think is driving for you. For somebody else, it might be you've got elevated amyloid, you've got elevated tau. We need to direct you accordingly. And I think we're seeing those emerge too.
And I love that we're talking about emerging therapies in terms of medication trials, but we should also not discount the things that we talked about earlier as far as how to slow disease progression. We should never discount sleep health and movement and staying socially active, sensory input. All of that continuously plays a role in our long-term brain health. Even when Alzheimer's has been diagnosed or other dementias diagnosed, we should still focus on those pillars as well for as long as possible.
Absolutely. And I think when we think about even combination approaches, it has to incorporate those too, right? It could be combinations of behavioral interventions or combinations of behavioral and medication interventions that may have the better outcome for an individual. I think we've seen that in oncology. We've seen certain chemotherapy regimens are actually more effective in somebody that is physically active. Well, can we say that we might see that same thing in some of these treatments? We don't know.
More to come. Dr. Snyder, you are involved in several major research initiatives. Are there any highlights that you can share with us?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of work in real world data. So how do we collect and understand real world care for anybody receiving any of the treatments that are available today and approved by the FDA? Because we want to understand who's responding, who's not responding, and what might be the circumstances that we see a greater response or a greater benefit. Also, there's so many questions that we don't know the answers to. For instance, of that more than 7.4 million Americans that are living with clinically diagnosed Alzheimer's disease, 2/3 of them are women. And we don't understand why. And so we've really activated for the last decade a lot of studies to try to understand why. What are the differences? Women and men are different throughout life. And there are differences in terms of hormonal levels, sleep patterns, immune responses. Women who have more pregnancies have changes in vasculature and immune system throughout life. And we see that actually impacting risk. And so understanding that and understanding that biology has been a big area of focus.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm curious, are there any other Alzheimer's Association efforts that you can share with us?
I'm really proud and honored to have been part of a large study called US Pointer that scientifically tested in over 2,100 individuals from all across the country a specific intervention that looked at physical exercise, nutrition, using the MIND diet, cognitive engagement, social engagement through team meetings, and then health monitoring that looked at both the heart health and the overall metabolic health that an individual was experiencing and helped to manage that. And when individuals had greater structure and support to really achieve those goals, we saw a greater benefit on cognition. Now, this is not dementia prevention. We don't know that yet. But these are individuals that were at an increased risk for cognitive impairment. 78% reported having a family history of memory concern. They had room to improve in terms of a sedentary lifestyle or not an optimal lifestyle. So I think that really speaks to just what you were saying, the conversation you have with your patients around brain health, around overall preventative care that can benefit health.
That's so great to hear that there's these initiatives happening right now to look at some of the core pillars of brain health. And we've also seen research into the long-term neurological effects of infections like COVID-19, where I can't believe it, we're like more than 6 years out from that. What insights are emerging there?
It was really early on in 2020 that we actually had been engaged by a team at the University of Texas, San Antonio, who had done a lot of work over the years with prior COVID pandemics or epidemics that had happened. And they were sure it was getting into the brain, and they anticipated that there was going to be some need for us to understand the impact, if any. And so we started to bring together global experts, and this was back in February, March of 2020, to try to really understand what was happening around the world. And through that, develop a plan for how we could ask the question of what's that long-term impact on the brain. It's clear that for some people, there are changes that happen in the brain related to COVID infection that may make their brain more susceptible to disease changes. Now, we don't completely understand all of this and why somebody has those changes. So we're really doing a lot of work to understand this. And what are we then seeing from a clinical perspective, a symptom perspective in those individuals? And it's not a straightforward answer.
Yeah. And with so many advancements underway and so much research poured into this space, how close are we to meaningfully changing the trajectory of Alzheimer's? I keep thinking back, and we discovered this disease when Dr. Alzheimer's first described it in like 1905 or something, so over 120 years. And we've made a lot more advancement in the past several decades, but are we close to finding a cure?
I think if you look at the literature, while it was first described at the beginning of the 1900s, most of the science didn't happen until after 1980. We've made those significant leaps in just the last few years with the first treatments that are targeting the underlying biology, with the first tools for actually diagnosis in the clinic, where we've seen research translate to care. So in terms of a timeline, I'm not sure I can say, but I will say I am motivated and optimistic by what we see in the pipeline of what's emerging as new targets and new approaches in clinical trials. I think we've learned a lot in terms of how we better identify who should be in what trial and when, so that we have right patient, right time, right treatment. We've refined that in such a way that if we don't know, we know what we need to do to get there. So we're not going to necessarily target a particular biology unless we can identify it and confirm that that's a biology in the individual. And I think we're going to continue to see these significant advances in treatment, in diagnosis, in care, and in thinking about brain health as a lifelong consideration.
I love that, and I'm hopeful too. I'm so grateful for all the work and all the scientists who are pouring their lives into this space, and for leaders like you who are leading this movement. We do have a closing tradition on our podcast. So when you think about brain health and longevity, what does aging forward mean to you? And how do you personally age well?
Yeah, if I think about things that I hope are part of my aging trajectory, I want to stay independent. I want to stay active. I want to preserve my cognitive, but also my physical health as I age. And I think the types of things that I incorporate, I am very focused on my sleep, because I do think sleep is an important aspect in terms of our brain health. I don't smoke. I eat a relatively balanced diet most days. I try to bring in physical activity in a way that I can do it in my life. So never going to run that marathon, but how do I make sure I'm building in my steps? I'm getting the walking, I'm getting my blood pumping through my body, and I'm doing what I can. And then I think I do stay fairly cognitively and socially engaged in lots of ways. And so those activities often go hand in hand for me, of keeping my brain active, both cognitively and socially.
Love it. Brain center living. We should all aim for that. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Dr. Snyder, and reminding us that Alzheimer's disease is not a story defined only by fear or inevitability, that science is advancing, our understanding is growing, and now we know that brain health is shaped by so many factors across the lifespan. And while no single strategy offers complete protection, there is real power in the choices that we make and the habits we build over time. So prevention is not perfection, but it's progress. So thank you again so much for being on the show. This is a great conversation.
I really enjoyed the dialogue and the discussion, but also just the importance of raising awareness around what we can do each and every day. And thank you for everything that you do to bring that awareness forward.
So that's all for this episode. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more informed, inspired, and empowered. If you have a topic suggestion for a future episode, you can leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272. And we might even feature your voice on the show. For more Aging Forward episodes and resources, head to mayoclinic.org/agingforward. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on your podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and stay active.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.